God wants you to see the truth about this person. Don't miss this story. Something shifted in the quiet space between two ordinary moments, and almost no one noticed it at first. A smile lingered a second too long. A glance quietly changed direction. A simple conversation ended with an unexpected silence that seemed to carry a message of its own. If you had walked away right then, you would have missed the one tiny detail that revealed everything. But you didn't. And perhaps that is exactly why this story found you today. Somewhere in your own life, there may be a person you've struggled to understand. Their words seem kind, yet something never fully settles in your heart. Their actions appear genuine, yet a question keeps returning when everything grows quiet. What if today's story isn't just entertainment? What if it's an invitation to notice what has always been right in front of you? Stay with this, because the next few moments may help you recognize something you never expected to see. It all began in a small neighborhood cafe where people came for familiar conversations more than coffee. Every morning, the same faces appeared, carrying routines that looked almost identical. Among them was a young woman named Claire, whose calm confidence made everyone feel welcome. Across the room sat Daniel, someone who had quietly become part of her everyday life without anyone questioning why. He always remembered the smallest details about her schedule. He always offered help before she asked. On the surface, he seemed like the kind of person everyone hopes to meet. Friends admired him. Strangers trusted him. Yet there was another customer who rarely spoke but noticed something unusual. It wasn't anything dramatic. It was the way Daniel's expression subtly changed whenever Claire succeeded without his help. For just a fraction of a second, encouragement disappeared, replaced by something impossible to explain. Then the smile returned as though nothing had happened. Most people never would have caught it. But once you see a hidden pattern, it becomes difficult to ignore. Before you decide what it means, wait for what happens next, because another piece of the picture is about to appear. A few days later, Claire received exciting news about a career opportunity she had worked toward for years. Her happiness filled the room before she even spoke. Friends celebrated immediately. Daniel congratulated her too, saying every perfect word anyone would expect to hear. Yet later that afternoon, quiet conversations began circulating among people she barely knew. Tiny doubts appeared from nowhere. Questions about whether she was truly ready. Suggestions that maybe she should wait. None of the comments sounded openly negative. They were wrapped in concern, almost impossible to challenge. Claire couldn't understand why her confidence suddenly felt heavier than it had that morning. Then an older neighbor gently shared something that changed the direction of the story forever. "Pay attention," she said softly. "Sometimes the truth about a person isn't found in what they say directly to you. It's hidden inside what begins changing around you after they leave the room." Those words stayed with Claire long after the conversation ended. And as she quietly began observing instead of assuming, she noticed a series of moments that no longer looked like coincidences. One final detail still remained hidden, and discovering it would change not only how she saw Daniel, but how she would recognize genuine people for the rest of her life. The next morning unfolded with an unusual stillness, the kind that makes ordinary places feel as though they are waiting for something important to happen. Claire made a decision she had never made before. Instead of reacting to people's opinions, she simply observed them. She listened more than she spoke. She watched expressions after conversations ended instead of during them. Almost immediately, small details began connecting like pieces of a puzzle. Every time someone complimented her progress, Daniel smiled, but his eyes searched the room, almost as if he wanted to measure everyone else's reaction before showing his own. Whenever Claire spoke about a new opportunity, he was the first to mention possible obstacles, always presenting them as friendly advice. None of his words sounded cruel. In fact, they sounded incredibly reasonable. That was what made them so difficult to recognize. Then something unexpected happened. Claire met an elderly bookstore owner who had watched people for decades. After hearing only a few details, he quietly said, "The people who truly celebrate your light never feel the need to dim it first." Those words echoed through Claire's mind for the rest of the day. She began remembering dozens of conversations she had dismissed as harmless, and suddenly they looked completely different. Every forgotten moment carried a hidden meaning she had never noticed before. Stay with this story, because the next discovery revealed a truth that changed everything she believed about trust. And if this story is speaking to your heart, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments and subscribing so you won't miss the next chapter of this unforgettable journey. That evening, Claire opened an old notebook where she had written important memories from the past 2 years. She wasn't looking for evidence against anyone. She simply wanted clarity. As page after page turned, a remarkable pattern emerged. Every major breakthrough in her life had been followed by subtle conversations that left her questioning herself. Every exciting dream somehow became surrounded by hesitation shortly after she shared it with Daniel. Yet when she kept certain victories private, those moments blossomed peacefully without unexpected doubt or confusion. It wasn't proof of bad intentions. It was something even more revealing. A reminder that not everyone is meant to have unlimited access to your hopes while they are still growing. Some relationships flourish because they are built on encouragement. Others quietly weaken because they feed on uncertainty. Claire realized she had spent months asking, "What's wrong with me?" when perhaps the better question had always been, "Why do I feel different after spending time with certain people?" That single realization lifted a weight she hadn't even known she was carrying. For the first time in a long while, she felt peaceful instead of confused. But one unanswered question remained. If Daniel wasn't the person she believed he was, then who had truly been supporting her all along without asking for recognition? As the sun set beyond the quiet streets, Claire received a message from someone she hadn't spoken with in months, a former coworker named Emma. There was nothing dramatic about the message. It simply read, "I just wanted you to know I've always believed in what you're capable of. Don't let temporary voices become permanent limits." Claire smiled, not because the words were extraordinary, but because they arrived at exactly the right moment. Suddenly she understood something that the story had been revealing all along. The truth about a person is rarely uncovered through one shocking event. It is revealed through consistent patterns, quiet choices, and the feeling they leave behind long after they've gone. Some people bring calm, confidence, and freedom wherever they go. Others unintentionally leave behind hesitation, uncertainty, and emotional noise. Learning the difference is one of life's greatest gifts. Claire looked up at the evening sky with renewed confidence, knowing she no longer needed to chase approval or fear disappointing anyone. She simply needed the wisdom to recognize who truly celebrated her journey. But hidden beyond this peaceful ending was one final conversation that Claire was never supposed to overhear, and what was said during that conversation would reveal the deepest truth of all. A quiet conversation began the following afternoon in the most unexpected place, a peaceful community garden where laughter usually drifted through the air and every visitor seemed to leave feeling lighter than when they arrived. Claire had only stopped by to clear her thoughts before an important meeting, never imagining she would hear the words that answered questions she had carried for months. She wasn't trying to listen, but two familiar voices reached her from the other side of a flowering hedge. One belonged to Daniel. The other belonged to someone she barely knew. There was no anger in Daniel's voice, no bitterness, no obvious cruelty. Instead, there was something much more difficult to recognize. "She's becoming more confident lately," he quietly admitted. "I just hope she doesn't change too much." His companion asked an innocent question. "Why would that worry you? Isn't that what you've always wanted for her?" A long silence followed before Daniel finally answered. "People change when they realize how much they're capable of, and sometimes they stop needing the people who helped them along the way." Claire stood completely still. Those words didn't sound like hatred. They sounded like fear. For the first time, she understood that not every person who holds you back intends to hurt you. Sometimes they are simply afraid of being left behind. That realization changed the entire story. Before you decide what it means, stay with this moment, because another truth was quietly waiting just around the corner. Claire walked away without interrupting the conversation, carrying a strange mixture of relief and compassion. Suddenly, countless memories rearranged themselves into a clearer picture. She remembered every occasion when Daniel had encouraged her to play it safe, every time he suggested waiting a little longer before chasing a dream, every conversation that gently redirected her excitement toward caution. None of it had seemed harmful at the time. Yet together, those moments formed a pattern she could no longer ignore. Later that evening she visited her grandmother, a woman whose quiet wisdom had guided generations of the family. Without mentioning any names, Claire simply asked, "How do you know whether someone truly wants the best for you?" Her grandmother smiled warmly before answering, "Watch what happens when your light grows brighter. The right people never ask you to shine less so they can feel more comfortable. They simply move closer to the light with you." Those words settled deeply into Claire's heart. She realized that truth doesn't always arrive through dramatic discoveries. More often, it appears through peaceful clarity, replacing confusion one small piece at a time. And as that clarity grew stronger, something inside her changed forever. She stopped searching for approval and started paying attention to peace. What happened next would become the greatest confirmation she had received yet. The following week brought the opportunity Claire had been hoping for, and this time she chose a different path. Instead of announcing every detail, she quietly moved forward, sharing her plans only with those whose encouragement had always felt genuine. The difference was astonishing. Her days became calmer. Her confidence grew naturally. Decisions that once felt overwhelming suddenly seemed simple because they were no longer surrounded by unnecessary doubt. Then one evening her phone lit up with a message from Daniel. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. It simply asked if everything was okay because she had become different. Claire looked at the screen for a long moment before gently smiling. She hadn't become different at all. She had simply learned the difference between voices that create peace and voices that quietly create uncertainty. At that very moment, she understood the deeper meaning behind this entire journey. Sometimes God doesn't reveal the truth about a person by exposing them in a dramatic scene. Sometimes the truth appears by giving you enough wisdom to recognize the difference between genuine encouragement and subtle limitation. Once you see that difference, you can never unsee it. And just when Claire believed every hidden lesson had finally come into the light, an unexpected visitor arrived at her door carrying a small envelope that would uncover one final secret no one saw coming. The soft knock at Claire's door came just as the evening sky turned gold, and for a brief moment, the world outside seemed to pause. Standing on the porch was an elderly mail carrier she had known for years, holding a small cream-colored envelope with no return address and only her first name written across the front. He smiled kindly and said, "I almost missed delivering this today, but something told me it couldn't wait." Those simple words lingered in the air long after he walked away. Claire slowly opened the envelope and found a handwritten note. There was no signature. Only one sentence filled the page: "The people who truly believe in your future rarely compete with it." She read it once. Then again. The message didn't accuse anyone. It didn't tell her who to trust or who to avoid. Instead, it invited her to look at every relationship through a new lens. She thought about the people who had celebrated her victories without making them about themselves. She remembered the quiet friends who never needed credit for encouraging her. She remembered the conversations that always left her feeling stronger instead of smaller. In that peaceful reflection, the final pieces of the story gently settled into place. Sometimes the greatest answers don't arrive as loud revelations, they arrive as quiet clarity that refuses to leave your heart. If this journey has helped you see something differently, we'd love to hear your thoughts below, and if stories like this speak to you, consider subscribing so you can continue this journey with us. The following days felt lighter than any Claire could remember. She wasn't trying to distance herself from anyone out of resentment. Instead, she began making choices that protected her peace. She became more intentional about who heard her dreams before they became reality. She noticed how certain conversations filled her with energy while others quietly drained it. More importantly, she stopped feeling guilty for choosing environments where hope could grow without constant doubt. As this new chapter unfolded, something remarkable happened. People she had overlooked for years naturally stepped closer into her life. A former teacher reached out to congratulate her on her recent success. A neighbor she barely knew offered an unexpected opportunity that aligned perfectly with her goals. An old friend called simply to ask how she was doing, with no hidden agenda and no expectation of anything in return. Claire realized that while she had spent so much time trying to understand one confusing relationship, she had nearly missed the many beautiful connections that had always been waiting nearby. The truth wasn't only about recognizing who wasn't helping her. It was also about appreciating those who had quietly supported her all along without asking for attention. That realization became more valuable than any single answer she had been searching for. Months later, Claire stood in front of a room filled with people celebrating the launch of the project she had once been afraid to pursue. Looking across the audience, she noticed familiar faces smiling with genuine happiness, and she understood something that would remain with her for the rest of her life. Real encouragement never demands ownership of your success. Real kindness doesn't become uncomfortable when you begin to grow. Real relationships don't require you to shrink your dreams to preserve someone else's comfort. And perhaps that is the deepest truth hidden inside this story. Sometimes God doesn't place obvious signs in your path. Instead, He gives you the wisdom to notice consistent patterns, peaceful moments of clarity, and the quiet difference between those who simply admire your potential and those who sincerely want to see it fulfilled. Once that understanding becomes part of your heart, every future decision becomes a little clearer, every relationship becomes a little easier to understand, and every step forward carries a little more confidence. The story may have begun with unanswered questions, but it ends with something far greater, a new way of seeing people, a deeper trust in quiet wisdom, and the confidence to move toward the future without fear, knowing that truth has a remarkable way of revealing itself exactly when you're ready to recognize it. A season passed, and life settled into a rhythm Claire had never experienced before. There were still unexpected conversations, surprising opportunities, and moments that demanded difficult decisions, but one thing had completely changed: she no longer rushed to interpret people by their promises alone. Instead, she paid attention to consistency. One afternoon, while walking through the same neighborhood where this journey had quietly begun, she noticed something that would have escaped her months earlier. A young couple sat on a park bench discussing an important life decision. One person's words were full of excitement about the future, while the other's response was calm, thoughtful, and deeply encouraging. There was no competition. No subtle attempt to redirect the dream. No hidden desire to remain in control. They simply listened, smiled, and asked, "How can I help you make this happen?" Claire couldn't help but smile herself. That single question carried more love than 100 dramatic speeches ever could. In that moment she realized the greatest lessons are often learned not by watching extraordinary events, but by recognizing extraordinary character in ordinary moments. Stay with this final stretch of the story, because one quiet encounter is about to reveal why everything happened exactly as it did. A few weeks later, Claire received an invitation to speak at a local gathering about personal growth and meaningful relationships. She stood before the audience with no intention of teaching them how to judge others. Instead, she shared something far more valuable. For a long time, she said, I believed truth would arrive through one dramatic revelation. I thought there would be a single conversation that explained everything. But that's rarely how wisdom works. Truth usually arrives one peaceful observation at a time. The room grew silent as she continued. Pay attention to how people respond when good things happen in your life. Notice who celebrates without comparison. Notice who encourages without hesitation. Notice who brings peace instead of confusion. Those patterns tell a story words alone never can. After the gathering ended, dozens of people approached her, not because they had discovered someone to fear, but because they had finally understood what genuine support feels like. Several admitted they had been overlooking Faithful, encouraging people simply because they had been focused on louder voices. Others said they had learned to stop questioning themselves every time they left certain conversations. Claire realized her journey had never been about exposing another person. It had always been about learning to recognize truth with wisdom instead of suspicion. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Claire returned to the little cafe where everything had first begun. The tables looked the same. The familiar laughter still filled the room. Yet she had changed completely. She no longer searched for hidden motives in every interaction, nor did she carry resentment toward those who couldn't celebrate her growth. She simply understood that every relationship reveals itself over time through repeated choices, quiet moments, and lasting peace. Looking around, she felt grateful, not because every chapter had been easy,